want to say that, just add that we are, like, the first person to come up is going to be Carol Ransom. So you might want to say something like, now is the time when anyone else would like to say something, please come up. I understand Carol Ransom has something, so let's welcome her, and then just some, so.
And it's Ransom?
Carol Ransom. I think you know her.
Yeah.
She'll be first, and then if anyone wants to come up after.
Following this service, there will be an opportunity for fellowship and refreshments downstairs, and we hope that you'll all join together for that as we continue this celebration of life. Friends, we gather here in the protective shelter of God's healing love. We are free to pour out our grief and know that God cares. We gather as children of God, conscious of others who have died and of the frailty of our own existence on earth. It was just 2 years ago that this family remembered and celebrated the life of Mary Jane Tigert, commending her to God's keeping. Today, our focus is to celebrate the life of her husband, Douglas. Yet we are mindful of their being together once again. We come to comfort and support one another in our common loss. Yet we also come to remember and give thanks for life well lived. May we hear God's word of hope that can move us to offer God our praise. We celebrate the good news of Christ's resurrection. Whether we live or whether we die, we belong to Christ, who is Lord both of the dead and the living. Our opening hymn is number 80, Our God, Our Help in Ages Past, and it's in the blue hymnal. Please stand. Please be seated. Let us join together in our opening prayer. Dear Father, there is a season and a time for everything in this world. Today you have granted us a chance to celebrate the life of a loved one, and we want to say thank you. Even though we are finding it hard to accept what has happened, we know that everything works out together for good. Father, give us the peace that surpasses all understanding as we start this program. Give us the strength to share the beautiful moments that we shared with Douglas and Mary Jane, our beloved departed. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We have two scripture readings today, and the first one is from the Gospel of John, the 14th chapter, verses 1 through 3, and I would ask you to read this together with me in unison. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And together, Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. At this point in the service, we will remember Douglas, and I would call your attention to the fact that at the end of people speaking, there will be an open time, and you'll all have the opportunity to share a story. And any story is an okay story. So that's very much, we are celebrating God's gift of life today and a life lived. Very well. At this time, Sandra Cassandras.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. I know my parents are smiling down on us right now, so happy to have all their dearest friends and family sharing this day together. My dad, Douglas, Dougie, professor, doctor, dean, husband, friend, or uncle. Regardless of how you knew my dad, you knew he was kind, funny, intelligent, dedicated, hardworking, loving, competitive, and at times a little bit embarrassing, but unbelievably generous. To me, he was my idol. He was my mentor. He was my hero. He was larger than life, so fun, so giving, and he always had my back. My earliest memories of my dad were in Chicago, where we lived for about 4 years. I remember playing ball with Dad in the backyard, being pushed on the swings and playing in the camper. Oh yes, we had a camper. And we actually camped for a few summers, and it was fun. I remember roasting marshmallows over the campfire, swimming in the lake, and Susan running away and getting lost a few times. At home, we went through a few dogs. Our last dog was my favorite. She was a collie named Tiger. Get it? Tiger, Tigert. My dad named her. God, I love that dog. Unfortunately, one day when Dad was walking Tiger, he only came back with the leash. He had no recollection of taking the leash off or losing Tiger. Suffice it to say, we thought it might be best to move on to cats. Chicago was where my dad landed his first teaching position at the University of Chicago, but it would not be his last. When I was 6, Dad was recruited to the University of Toronto, where he ultimately became the dean of the business school and started his own business in retail consulting. It was in Toronto where I learned of my dad's passion for water with both sailing and boating. He bought this old wooden 40-foot sailboat called the Mystic 7, and I have an incredible amount of fond memories of the time spent on that boat. Dad learned to sail, and then he taught me. I remember sailing up and down Lake Ontario, and once across the lake to, I think, St. Catharines, or somewhere over there. I loved to lay on the bow and tan with a cool breeze washing over me. But did I say that boat was old? It broke down a lot. In fact, it broke down each and every time we went out on it. My dad always fixed it, but eventually he had enough and he sold it. Dad was a great family man. He loved to sail, but he also loved to play tennis, play pool, party, and travel. Mom and Dad played a lot of tennis in Toronto, so I wanted to learn too. I loved playing with my dad. He was a lefty, super athletic, and very good. I could never beat him, but I sure had fun trying. Dad also taught me how to play pool. I really enjoyed that too. Became not a bad player, but again, could never beat him. In high school, I joined the cross-country team, and my dad would join me on my neighborhood training runs. That always made the time go by fast. Growing up, we had the best vacations. I know I told you about the camping, but after we moved to Toronto, we would summer at my grandparents' home in Maine, where my mom grew up. Those summers were priceless and even more fun when our cousins, the Fourniers, were there. It was during one of those summers that my dad spotted and made an offer on the house on the coast of Maine where he would retire. Dad also took us to New York City, where I first saw my first Broadway and off-Broadway shows. We had a fabulous vacation in Barbados. Both of those trips included my dad's brother's family, my Uncle Don, Aunt Donna, John, and David. Dad and Don were best friends, Mom and Donna were best friends, and Susan, John, David, and I were all close in age, so those trips were so much fun. As I mentioned, my dad was incredibly fun, generous, and a great family man. Dad's retail consulting business had really taken off, and with it, him. His business was now global, with clients as far away as South Africa and Australia. This allowed my dad to travel the world, and travel he did. He went everywhere. It was because of those travels that when my dad was up for sabbatical at University of Toronto, he made the decision to rent our house out and move us all to The Hague in Holland for a year. He used his time to teach at the local university, research and write a book, maintain his consulting business, and then travel with us to see many of the surrounding countries. Being a kid, I was 12. This was one of the best experiences of my life and the worst. I mean, I did not like European food. I had to share a room with my sister. I'm sorry. And we could not watch my favorite show, The $6 Million Man in Holland. Life was really hard. But with the wisdom of age, I have to say how incredibly fortunate we were to have had the opportunity to live abroad and study new cultures. Imagine reading the biographies of Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Michelangelo, Monet, and Da Vinci, and then having the opportunity to see the actual masterpieces of those very artists. We skied in the Pyrenees, vacationed on the French Riviera, and spent a month in Crete. We toured England, France, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Holland, Norway, and much more. And how was this possible? Because of the love and the generosity of my dad. Dad started to mix business with pleasure on his international travels. He often took my mom with him on business trips and then tack on a few extra weeks to explore other countries. Sometimes they traveled together, and sometimes they went with many of their friends and relatives, many of them from Maine. Then one year, my dad asked me if I would like to go on a trip with him, and that trip was to Thailand. And it was one of my most cherished memories of our time together. I thought immediately, yes, sign me up. We had the best time. He loved showing me the country. We enjoyed the food, the people, the sights. The beaches were breathtaking. And we played a lot of tennis. It was such a memorable trip together. I followed in my dad's footsteps in my education and career, graduating from Queens and starting a career in retail. Dad was my trusted advisor, and he never steered me wrong. In fact, he was the one who encouraged me to come back to the United States after graduating. By this time, he had retired from University of Toronto and was now teaching in Babson University. Dad helped me connect with a few interviews in the retail industry, and the rest is history. Did I tell you he always had my back? It wasn't long that he started to pester me to continue getting my MBA. Now, this should come as no surprise to any of you that knew my dad. He was always encouraging others to further their careers and get a better education. In fact, this was a trait he exhibited early on. Dad liked to strike up conversations with nearly anyone he encountered, be it a friend or a waiter or my friends when they came over to play after school. As long as I can remember, he would drill every waiter, waitress, doctor, nurse, anybody, all my friends, and say, "What are you going to do with your life? What's your next step? What's your aspirations?" Did I say that sometimes it was a little embarrassing? With Dad's encouragement and help, I made the hard decision to go back to school and get my MBA. Yes, I did. He was right. I needed it. Immediately after graduation, I received a job offer, and I never looked back. When Dad retired, he and my mom moved to their summer home here in Maine on Heath Road. My parents remodeled the house and ended up making it their forever home. They were so happy here, it was their paradise. They hosted so many parties, and they met everyone on Heath Road and in and around Bremen and Damerscott and Waldoboro. My parents developed lasting friendships in Maine. One in particular was our historic friendship with the Ransom family. The Ransom family seemed like the royalty of Heath Road. I remember my very first time driving down Heath Road to our new home, and Dad pointing out a beautiful tennis court. I remember him telling me that he was going to meet the owner of that tennis court and become best friends so that we could play there all the time. And sure enough, he did just that. Some of my best memories are playing tennis on Heath Road and the friendships I made with the children in the Ransom family. It wasn't long after that, my parents became friends with almost everybody else on the road, the Shrams, the DeGregorios in particular. So many cocktail parties and lunches and parades. Both Mom and Dad became very active in the community, with my mom volunteering at the library, making wreaths in the winter, and joining the Red Hat Society. Dad was a member of the Decadent Dessert Club at the Lincoln Theater. He had a passion for food, and in particular, desserts. He had fun serving desserts at the classic movie nights held at the theater, and sometimes he would even dress up in the theme of the movie being played when he served. Dad joined the local Rotary Club, and it was from there that his generosity really took flight. He was a member of Rotary International for over 15 years. His traveling led him to witness the needs of children in several foreign countries. He was instrumental in providing clean water systems in rural schools in Thailand with the Clean Drinking Water for Schools program. He described it as being such a good feeling when you can help financially support and see students become healthier and able to attend school. He also worked on a school addition program in South Africa for 35 students. On his annual visits, he was able to see firsthand the major difference those programs made to the well-being of the students. These last years here in Maine brought challenges. Dad never wanted to live in assisted living, but eventually it became necessary. While he resisted the move in the beginning, his growth and evolution remind me of some advice he once gave me. He used to tell me this: when things get tough in your career, you can either leave or you can stick it out, but I promise you nothing will stay the same for very long. Sure enough, Dad came to love Lincoln Home and later Harborview Cottage. He was very involved with the staff and the residents, and he was always willing to join in any activity, be it exercise, drawing, singing, reading to others, or planning a special meal. When Dad moved to the cottage, he was the only male out of 9 residents. It wasn't long before he was known as King of the Hill. However, at times he did miss his male companionship. So, like my dad's nature, he took matters into his own hands, and he created the T5 Club. It was made up of the 4 men who worked for Lincoln Home and the Harborview Cottage and my dad. He had shirts made with a logo and T5 on the front and each of their names on their sleeves. The group would go out to lunch together or watch football together or whatever else they decided would be fun, but they had a great time together. Another one of my favorite stories from his time in Harborview was when he happened to come upon a woman getting a haircut. She was sobbing, and she said, "Look, they cut off all my hair." To which he replied, "Well, I think you look absolutely beautiful." And she smiled. Kind, charitable, and generous. Those traits have manifested differently at various times in my dad's life and within the many different titles he held, but they were unwavering and always there. People reached out to me and my sister from as far away as Australia to offer their condolences, which shows you what a wonderful man he was and what an impact he made to the lives around the globe. One in particular really stood out for me. We received a message that all the flags were lowered to half-mast at the University of Toronto upon learning of my dad's death, and an announcement and a tribute was sent to all the faculty and students, letting them know what a great man my dad was and what a contribution he made to this university. Thank you.
You know, Dad never asked me to travel with him. I've always thought I was adopted. I think that the hardest moment in your life is that moment when you hug your parents, and in that very fragile second, you realize for the first time that they are now the one that needs looking after, and you are now the caregiver. It's not the flu or a sprained ankle or a temporary passing illness where they'll recover and go back to being your parent. It may not be the moment that you tell them the shift in the universe has happened, that you are now the dependable and not the dependent. Just that you realize from that point forward and forever that you need to look after them wholly and completely. I know exactly when each of those moments were for my mom and my dad. It's when time, instead of slipping by in minutes, well, moments, takes a giant leap into the future all at once. You want to tell them that it's okay, that you've got this, but you know that they will not believe you. So you let that last moment slip quietly by, unannounced. And you hope that time will find a way to slow itself back down. This is a love letter to my dad. Hi, Pop. I know that wherever you are well. And since it's pretty early yet, you're probably sitting there with a caffeine-free Diet Pepsi, which I never really understood. I know that you're enjoying the view, and I'm going to go with you're not smoking a cigarette. Now, before I go any further, I hope that you will indulge me, because I also know that Ruby is curled up at your feet. So if you could just take a quick moment and bend down and give her a kiss for me, and let her know that I still think of her every single day, I would really appreciate it. Now, I'm not going to lie. It was not easy for me to write this letter to you. I wasn't really sure where to begin. You and I were not really the best of friends when I was growing up, and that's okay. Parents are not supposed to be their friends of their children. And girls are raised by their mothers, and I think feared by their fathers. At least, that's how you acted every time Mom went out of town. How else would you explain that every time Mom went out of town, you served us cream corn and liver, ensuring that we would have to sit at that table the entire time because we weren't allowed to leave until we ate everything on the plate, and we weren't going to eat it until Mom came home. But mostly, this early part was hard to write because we just didn't have that much in common. You liked stock markets and business and shined shoes and straight A's and cleaned bedrooms and four-course dinners that had to be cleared and cleaned up afterwards, including the floor swept and mopped every single time. You liked fine wines and footballs and westerns. I didn't even know what the stock market was. I liked Barbies and kittens and the Love Boat and Fantasy Island and purple pants and short skirts. I liked shining shoes long enough to watch TV on a school night. But I pretty much didn't care what they looked like in the end. Although, I think you secretly knew this because whenever I brought the shoes to you, you asked me if the program I was watching was over. And if I said no, you would look at them and go, I think they're not quite done. I think you need to give them another try. And if I said yes, you would say, okay, great, here's 50 cents. Fun fact, I also really liked to jump on my bed. And my bed at the time was a mattress on these really old springs, not like the box springs we have now. And one day, to my utter shock, they broke. Thinking that beds cost about a couple $1 million, I panicked. Looking around my room, I took my garbage can and I shoved it under the bed to prop it up because it was sagging in the middle. And for the next week, I slept on the floor. So one day my dad came in and he was going to empty the garbage can and he couldn't find it and he asked me where it was. So I came up with the perfect ingenious lie and I said, it's in the closet. Whereupon he opened the closet and it wasn't there. So eventually the truth came out. My dad looked under my bed, pulled the garbage can out, the bed fell through, and I stood there terrified as to what came next, and under his breath he muttered, humph, I'm amazed that this bed lasted as long as it did. We bought it, I think, at a yard sale. I think the Haydens have an extra box spring they said we could have. And then he left. So I know that you secretly love jumping, too. I also know this because when we traveled overseas, you used to take us to the beach where they had rows and rows of trampolines that kids would line up with their allowance money, and you would wait patiently with us for our turn. Of course, this was back before safety had been invented, and we'd get our 5 minutes to jump and jump and jump. No nets, no anything. If you jumped off, you just landed on the sand, and you didn't care. I lost my place. When my kids were younger, we took a trip to Disney. And every night we would watch the TV for the next day's adventure, and we'd have the map out. And Disney has this must-do thing. And we'd circle the map to make sure that we did all the must-dos. When I started to write this to you, Dad, I was going to do a play on words and do the must-don'ts that you taught me. But it sort of turned out a little bit like a roast. And I didn't think this was quite the venue for that. For example, I never want to follow you into a tennis court. We'll get to that later. Or I never wanted to follow you into a store because inevitably you were going to dress down any store clerk around while Sandra and I desperately tried to find another parent to pretend that we belonged to. But anyways, I finally figured out that I just wanted to come up here and thank you and Mom for a very few important lessons, and yes, moments, that have made an impact on me and my family and those that we love. You taught us how to love the great outdoors. We camped, we swam, we skied. We briefly had a farm. I remember during a blizzard, you were very dedicated to getting a Christmas tree off that farm, and you took Sandra and I with us. Before we got to the farm, we stopped for lunch, and you bought us a whole bunch of candy. When we got to the farm, you determined that it was too cold for us to go, so you left us in the car with all the candy, and you marched off into the woods. We were pretty sure you had died, so we ate all the candy. On the way home, inevitably, I think one or both of us threw up in the car. You didn't get mad. You were just excited that you had the tree, and you were our hero. These types of lessons teach us to never give up, and to be tenacious, and to be tough, and to follow through. I'm not going to thank you for teaching us cross-country skiing. I always hated that. I think it's a made-up sport. It's just like running with really awkward shoes on it. But the downhill skiing we really loved. And I get a lot of mileage out of those stories, especially the part where you and Mom had to stop halfway down to smoke a cigarette. But it's really on the water where you really shined. Teaching a kid to swim, to be confident, to love the water, and the boating, and I'm sorry I'm going to repeat one of Sandra's stories, but in a different way. Those were amazing days. Letting us sit on the bow, and I really hope the bow is the front of the boat, letting us sit way out there on the very tip of the Mystic Seven, going up and down on those incredible swells, getting soaking wet, and yes, I hope I'm making you all seasick. Those were amazing moments. And those moments may have been few or far between because most of the time we didn't get the Mystic Seven off the dock and you were down deep in the bowels fixing the engine, which again was just incredible. We never knew you could do that. But even then, you let Sandra and I sneak off to the private property next door and there were these giant salt piles covered in this black plastic and Sandra and I would spend hours climbing up and sliding down and ruining our clothes. But even those were great times. And again, there are lessons learned there that you don't even realize you're learning. And you didn't get mad, and Mom may have gotten mad, but you certainly didn't mind. And they're just like, you can find fun anywhere, and you can be inquisitive, and you have to learn to explore your world, but you can be adventuresome and just have a great time wherever you are. And to explore and love learning really took off when we went overseas for a year. You went first to learn the language, and when you picked us up, you were carrying a purse, and we all laughed at you, but you said all the men over there carried them, and so did you, and you just be you, Dad, you always were. And that was in the 70s, and that joke was funnier then now that it is, and if my other kids were here, they'd be frowning at me, but again, you never cared what anybody else thought. You just did what you wanted to and showed us that it's okay to be different. You also taught us the love of the game. And this is a huge metaphor, so bear with me. You taught us everything, how to play cards, how to play poker, how to strategize, Yahtzee. I don't know how many thousands of games of cribbage and backgammon, and how to strategize, how to be a good loser. You can take those lessons anywhere in the world. You taught us how to beat Grandpa Petrocci over Christmas time in Livermore Falls, how to be strategic. This is turning into a Kenny Rogers song. But you also taught us how to teach other people how to play the game. And there have been so many times where I've traveled the world and I don't even speak the language, but if you have a deck of cards or dice or anything, and you can connect with people over simple games, it's amazing, and you never ran out of patience, not with us, and then later not with our grandchildren. It's amazing. Now, and I'm not going to get into tennis, Dad, because you weren't a great teacher of tennis, and I'm just not going to go there. And I know, no, Dad, don't try to change my mind, but just going to leave it. You also taught me how to be a really amazing grandparent, but even though I don't need that right this minute, you have been incredible. You were patient. You've just been fantastic with the kids, always playing with them, never tiring with them, making milkshakes with them, reading to them endless stories. But finally, and most importantly, Mom and Dad, you taught me and my family the importance of generosity, of giving of myself and teaching my kids as well. And this has been the gift that will always keep on giving. There's a quote that says, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy." You have both shown us over and over how the gift of generosity, and not just treasure, that part's easy, but of your talent and your time, of how that can make such a difference in your local and global community. Through Rotary, Dad, and you joined Rotary later in life, but in doing so, you allowed me to follow in your footsteps. You set the example, and my kids as well, to be introduced to it at a very early age. And you didn't do any of this for the glory, the headlines. You just did it because it was the right thing to do. After traveling the globe your entire life, of teaching people how to do things, you were ready and able to learn new things and to connect with all those people for the greater benefit of all. We have all seen your efforts, from the water wells in Malaysia to the daycares in South Africa, your local work with the library and the hospital and the town hall and the youth exchange, and my goodness, we loved those dog days and the chocolate sundaes. And I tell your Rotary story everywhere I go. So while I wait for my grandchildren, and I'm happy to wait, Azriel, don't think I'm rushing you, I am so grateful to be able to continue the tradition that you started. And I know that it's a very terrible cliche way to end, Dad, but it's so fitting, and it describes all that you and Mom have done so beautifully. We make a living by what we get, and we make a life by what we give. Mom and Dad, thank you for all that you have given us. We can take it from here. You've earned your rest. Thank you.
I'm the youngest of the 4 Tigert children. The oldest, Audrey, died unfortunately, very quickly in 1984 of pneumonia, a very fast-moving strain that apparently even had Atlanta, that had no cure for it. My oldest brother, Don, died fairly recently, a little over a year ago, from complications from abdominal surgery and a fall that kind of put the icing on the cake. He lived in Burlington, not too far away from me, and we did have many wonderful years close together. Our first house in St. Catharines was a small one, four bedrooms. So my brothers Doug and Don had to share a room. Later on, we moved to Glen Ridge area to a larger home, and that's where my brother Doug got me involved in tennis. I was only 8 years old. You had to be 8 to play at the St. Catharines Club. My dad was a golfer, but Doug was a tennis player, so that became something that I did through my 20s, 30s, 40s. Only when I started having some knee issues from years of physical education did I have to give up some of my hobbies. Doug attended the St. Catharines Collegiate, not really sure what things he participated in, but I do know that he loved tennis, and certainly that was the one thing that I can be grateful to, as I mentioned. When I was very small, the thing I remember most about them was that they took me to the movies in St. Catharines on most every Saturday afternoon. I think my mom just wanted to get us all out of the house. I helped them with paper routes. They kept, again, that was, again, keep me busy. But we did The other thing I remember that Doug and Don did together was they went tree planting in northern Ontario for 2 summers before they went off to university. After high school, Doug had a rather unsuccessful first year at the University of Toronto. We're not sure what he did. I think maybe it was a lot of bridge and other activities. So he had to switch schools because he couldn't go on in the program there. He switched to Queen's University in a marketing business program and fell in love with all that it involved. He became quite a scholar, and that was really, really very nice to see. Somewhere along there, and I'm not, again, too sure, he met Mary Jane Quattrochi, who was a St. Catherine's girl, but from an American family. Her dad was very involved in the Ontario paper mill. Mary Jane was studying nursing at the school in St. Catherine's, and I think once they started dating, that was the end of the looking for them. I think some of you have already mentioned all the traveling that they did around the world. We were certainly envious of all the places where they went, and I know they took the girls sometimes as well, and I think you had a year in Holland, I believe, so you had an extremely varied and interesting life, and we're glad for that.
Mentioned Vietnam.
Yes, okay, yes, this is kind of a key issue. There was a lot of uncertainty around the world in the late 60s. Vietnam and certain other issues, and Doug and Don both at the same time decided that they had to go back for safety to Canada. There was the thought that maybe even though they were older, they could be drafted into the U.S. Army. So they packed their bags and went to Toronto, and we had 10 years, I think, roughly, of time when they were close by, and we had a chance to spend some time with them. I spent one summer in Toronto taking a teacher's course, and stayed at their house for a summer and got to know them a little better. So that was wonderful. But then when they could, they of course went back to the States, and he joined the staff in Babson College, and that led to looking for a summer home and led to Damerscott, and many years of fun there too. It was a long drive, but we loved coming, and we loved going for boat rides. The water was a little too cold to swim, but Doug loved to go down every side road. I don't know how he remembered where they all went, but he knew where he wanted to take us, and he'd pick spots where there was rolling surf or quaint little inns and dining areas, and we thoroughly enjoyed all our visits down this way. Let's see, I lost my spot. I think it's the time for you to take over. I am having some short-term memory issues, which is something many of us start to deal with.
That's why I'm here.
To a certain age. Apologize.
I'll show her how to get back to her house. And also, she has some physical problems.
Yeah.
Bad leg. Okay, I'm just going to be, I'm her husband, by the way. My name's Peter. I'm going to act like a relief pitcher in baseball and give Janet a chance to catch her breath and talk about a few of the things I think have already been discussed, but they stand out in my memory. First of all, anybody who knew them knew that Doug and Mary Jane were very accommodating and generous hosts. Oh man, they were really generous. They loved having people visit them. Our first experience was when Doug and Mary Jane were in Chicago. Well, of course, we took advantage of the fact that they invited us, and that we went out to Chicago in the Christmas break, and I think we were there for about a week, and they showed us all the places that we should see in the Windy City. It was a great vacation for us. When they came back to Toronto, they hosted many family get-togethers in their house on LaSalle's Boulevard. And then when Doug moved to Babson in Boston, well, we had to take advantage of the fact we hadn't been in Boston before, so we visited them for a week. And you can be sure they gave us all the things we should see and do, and we did them, and we saw a lot of Boston. And of course, I think it's been mentioned by Janet that as soon as they bought that beautiful house in Damariscotta, we made sure we were visiting them on a fairly regular basis. And it was easy to see that we became very familiar with Maine lobsters, either through Mary Jane's kitchen or in the many restaurants that Doug and Mary Jane took us to. They were really incredible hosts. I think Janet's caught her breath, so she can finish up. Right there.
Mm-hmm. So as Peter has said, that we loved all our get-togethers here with Doug and Mary Jane. So we look back upon it, we realize how lucky we were. Children, grandchildren are so important to us as we get older, and they were certainly blessed in that regard. And it was absolutely wonderful for Sandra and Susan to organize this celebration of life for them, and we're extremely grateful that we were able to come and participate.
Okay, I got the paper.
You got it all.
This is, I got it. Just take the cane.
Thank you. What I have is a knee replacement that had to be done over because I had a fall in 2020, and I discovered that was a good replacement, but not so good.
Okay. Dear Papa and Nanny, no matter where I am, your spirit will forever and always be beside me. Where do I start? The day you met me, you gave me a hug. And from then on, I have wonderful memories of you both. Papa and I loved to play I Spy with my little eye with you. You always knew I cheated, but you never got mad. Nanny, how I love that jelly bean jar on that kitchen counter. Caitlin and I would sneak down at night and eat tons of them. I also loved how you put special gifts on our beds when we first arrived. It was like Christmas all over again. Nanny, you may have passed away, but your memories will live without me. I know you are now in a better place with Papa. I forever and always will be grateful that you are my grandmother. Papa taught me what it meant to be great and loving and a nice person. We would sit on your lap and play games and giggle and laugh. So Papa and Annie, you have been the best to me and my family. I love y'all both.
At this time, we would open it up for anyone who would like to speak, and Ransom is going to get us started.
And I have been asked to read by Pat Schramm and Harold Schramm, beloved neighbors of all of us on Heath Road, wrote these remarks to be read at the memorial service and asked if I would do it for them. The first part is written by Harold, who is wonderful, and they are so sad they can't be here, and they start with, "We are sorry that we cannot be here in person to honor and remember our dear friends and neighbors, Doug and Mary Jane. We have known them for almost 30 years since we first moved to Heath Road, and we miss them terribly. Doug and Mary Jane welcomed us with great friendship, which only grew over time. They were well known for their wonderful parties, at which all of Heath Road residents gathered for good fun and food. We were always happy to be there with them. Doug was a strong and outspoken expert on all matters, marketing in particular, and business in general. He enjoyed our lunches together when we would share our love of Megan's chocolate cake at the Newcastle Public House. In fact, he enjoyed life fully and was particularly generous as a Rotarian who spearheaded a water system project for an African community in great need. He shared his dock and his boat with neighbors, and we remembered with laughter our ill-fated trip to the islands off of Friendship, where we ran out of gas and had to be towed. Doug was ever confident of our successful return and thought nothing of the event. Others were happy just to see dry land again. He loved all of his grandchildren deeply. With others, he could offer a stern comment when nonsense challenged fact. He was proud of his teaching and administrative life, his international lectures, and most of all, his family. We miss his personality, his wit, and his truly caring manner." And then Harold's wife, Pat Schramm, wrote, "Mary Jane, M, she called her, and Carmen DiGregorio welcomed me, Pat, to the road, and my memories are wonderful and diverse. Every morning at 8:15, Em and I would talk on the phone and share any news we had about friends, events, and generally our feelings about everything. We would talk about as long as it took to cover all the news, and that's how we started every single day. If I was late, she would worry that something was wrong, and of course, reprimand me for making her upset. On our 1.5-hour trip to the hairdressers, we covered many stories and enjoyed it as our day, and ended it with a lovely lunch. Returning from one of those trips, Em and I were the first to drive over the new Heath Road Bridge that was dedicated to Horace and Betty Ransom, a fond memory for each of us. Em was more than a friend, as she was my kindred spirit and like a sister to me. She was knowledgeable about local people and the whole area. She and Doug hosted the best get-togethers, and on our beloved Heath Road on Heron Cove Lane, we all had fun and good food, and everyone enjoyed it. Mary Jane loved her family, and although Susan and Sandra lived away with their families, I knew them from Em and our conversations. I miss her every day and love her as we too love Doug. We were fortunate to be called their friends. Love, Pat and Harold."
Is there anyone else that would like to share a story or memory or appreciation of his life?
I just have one fond memory. I was at their wedding, and I was a young teenager, so I was paying very careful attention about weddings because I was a teenager. And it was beautiful, everything went well, we had a delicious reception, and then we were ready to say goodbye. And Doug disappeared. It was wondering where Doug was. Shortly he comes back. He had forgotten to pack a suitcase to go on his honeymoon. In the meantime, Mary Jane was sitting very patiently writing thank you. So that's what happens.
Will?
Good morning. I'm Will Jones, and my wife and I have been friends with both Mary Jane and Doug for around 20 years. And I'd just like to say just a quick few words. Doug and I had a lot in common, and we always enjoyed the social hospitality at their home. Mary Jane and Doug were always welcoming, as you said, to so many friends and neighbors in the community. Doug was a marketing person, as you know, and I think my comment would be that they both knew how to take a bite out of life. I mean, a big bite. They tackle things with passion, energy, and excitement. Doug and I were tennis players. We members of the seniors USTA local group here, and I would not want to be on the receiving end of Doug's cross-court forehand shots. They were vicious. I don't think he ever had a soft drop shot he gave to anybody. It was all a real hard slam back into your face if you were his opponent. He really enjoyed things. As a Rotarian, Doug had a passion, as you can assume from the comments I've made so far. He had a real passion for whatever he did. And Doug was chairman of our foundation for years. One of the, set a high bar for our foundation at Rotary. I remember when he was a Paul Harris Fellow, he bought the history of Rotary for all the Paul Harris Fellows and put those in everybody's hands. If you were at one of our events where he sold raffle tickets, you could not pass Doug without buying a raffle ticket. Whether we're at the YMCA selling fruit and nuts, or whether we were doing a kayak or a raffle downtown in front of the bookstore or in front of Rennie's. Doug would not let you buy. You might have more than one raffle tickets if you stopped to talk to Doug too long. And he was a joy to be with, a joy to play on the tennis court with. And he's one of these friends that you will remember forever, and it was an honor for both my wife Judy and to be a friend of Doug's and Mary Jane.
Anyone else?
Hi, so I'm Azriel. I'm Susan's youngest child. And coming up for vacation every year in Maine up here, going to the, Nanny and Grandpa's house and spending a week and a half there was some of my favorite memories. I always tell people, I work as a lifeguard back home in PA, and for some reason, every single one of us is taking a vacation to Maine this year. Every single one this summer. And so everybody always asks, like, oh, when are you going? Where are you going? And every time I told them, like, my grandparents, they had, we had this house up here and we're gonna go spend some time up where they used to live. And they were always, it's just such a nice place up here. And this place has always just felt like home, and almost every single person who's come up here has mentioned that Grandpa used to play tennis, so I feel like I should mention that I ended up playing tennis too, and I really wish I could have gotten to play with him. Sandra said she could never beat him. I wonder if I could, but there are just so many things that I wish I could have gotten to do with him and tell him, but I loved him a lot, and I really miss him and Nanny. And sorry, I'm not good at this. But yeah, they were great, and Maine was great, and I loved it so much up here, and I loved them so much. And yeah, I'm gonna go back.
I'm Hal Dittmer. I first met Doug and MJ and Sandra and Susan in the fall of 1968. My wife spoke a few minutes ago. The story was that we met in Chicago, in Des Moines, Iowa. Judy and I did, got married. Then we got the itch, I got the itch to go to graduate school. So, being a country boy from the plains of Kansas and Nebraska, I thought it'd be good to go to a major city and go to graduate school. So one weekend, we took a day off from working at IBM in Des Moines and went to Chicago to go to Northwestern, look at housing. And on the way out of town, Judy called Doug and MJ, and I think Doug answered the phone, and in his inimitable way said, "What are you doing here?" "Well, we're here to check out housing for Hal to go to graduate school at Northwestern." "You can't do that. You got to come to Chicago." And that's how it got started. You can just imagine Doug saying that with tremendous amount of confidence and sales. So we went over to see Doug and MJ, and that's where we met all of them, in my case. And Doug turned on the sales pitch, and we all know how good he was at that. So rather than going back to IBM in Des Moines to go to work on Monday morning, why I went to the University of Chicago campus. I think we stayed I'm sure we stayed with them that night. And of course, Doug had it all arranged with Dean Metcalf, and hadn't applied, hadn't done anything, but by the afternoon I was admitted. So I'm now going to the University of Chicago. Well, it was an amazing time at that graduate school of business. I think there were 6 or 7 Nobel Prize winners came out of there. And Doug was teaching marketing research, and it became really obvious what a special academic he was. He was an expert in a field that we all knew about demographics, but to bring the whole concept of how people thought psychologically about purchasing decisions and relationships and this sort of stuff, that was kind of just a new thing at that time. So psychographics. So he started doing research, had done research. I think his PhD was in this area as well. And I remember the story about Listerine. Who uses Listerine? People that hate germs. And there was a whole subcategory of consumers of people that hate germs. And so he was just an incredible scholar in the refinements of marketing research. And I think he's the first person that taught me how important it was to look at data and slice it and dice it and break it down. I took marketing research from him. I think he was generous. I got an A. And I still remember taking a whole box of cards over to the data center. Now you can do all that on a laptop or an iPhone. So it was really a great experience. But one of the funniest parts about going to University of Chicago and Doug, well, they were faculty and they were smart people and they'd always gotten good grades and they had PhDs. And a bunch of them would go on, Milton Friedman as an example, to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And so one day Doug says, "You worked at IBM, you got any money?" "Well, not much, but a little." "Well, we got this investment group we're putting together." "Well, what's it about?" "Well, we're going to go long or short in U.S. treasuries or something like that." Very obscure for me kind of investment. So I remember putting in $1,000 and then checking regularly on how it was doing. And I think I cashed out at 200 with all these Nobel Prize winners. It was just hilarious. Roman Wheel, who went on to become a famous academic, led that. And I never let Roman forget that. It was one of his embarrassing moments. He promised me not to tell too wide a story, but I think he's passed away as well. So anyway, we go to Chicago, and then I graduate there, and Doug and his brother Don and the Tigert boys were incredibly influential. They came from a family background of study and research and academic excellence. My parents graduated from the 8th grade, so I didn't know that whole life, that whole way of thinking. They knew it, and they taught it, and they projected it. And that was really, really cool to be a part of that. So the next story was, I came from an entrepreneurial family. Guess what? Farmers. They're entrepreneurs. And I still remember my dad telling the story, I like farming because I can do as I darn well please. I don't have any bosses. So I got into the corporate world, and there were always bosses. I didn't like that. So Doug says, well, you got to stay there, Al. But I went into consulting. That was fairly entrepreneurial. And then I quit to start my own business. And Doug always kept asking the question, when are you going to get a regular job? So anyway, I kept teasing him, and we went back and forth about that for a very long time. The last time I saw him, it was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago now. Doug and MJ hosted us at their house, the one with the boat out front and on the water and all that, fantastic place. And we went back and forth again about whether or not being an entrepreneur was a good thing to do or taking a regular job in a corporation. And I think I finally talked him into it, that being an entrepreneur in my case was the right decision. But anyway, I think of a few words about Doug and MJ. Generosity, absolutely. I mean, just the way Judy and I were treated that afternoon in the fall of '68 about come and check out Chicago. Confident, great salesman, absolutely. He could sell people on his ideas. Really smart in a very unique way. Very unique way. I mean, he became a worldwide expert, as we all kind of get, in retailing and understanding retailing at a level that nobody else was doing at the time. It was really very special. And energy, obviously, an incredible amount of energy. And just a good man. Thank you.
So I grew up next to Doug Tigert and the Tigerts. And we were sitting on the back deck. You've all been to his ocean home. And Doug, I was with my grandfather, and he leans over to me and goes, "Hey, Bob, how much money do you make?" And I was like, I looked at my grandfather, because we never talked money. I said, "Well, Doug, how much money do you make?" And he said, $2,500 for half a day, $7,500 for a full day. I have a 7-day rate. I also travel, they pay for my full consulting, and he went on this huge thing, and he goes, and they pay for all my food. When you go to the buffet, you put the fork, knife, spoon, wrap it in a napkin, put it in your back pocket, that way you have both hands for the buffet. And I thought, wow. And he goes, "So how much do you make?" And I said, "Well, not that much." I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "What do you think about retirement?" I'm 24, Doug. I'm looking for what do I think about my next meal, where that's coming from. And he goes, "Well, we have a lot to work with," and he helped me talk about retirement and think about retirement at age 24. And he taught me how to negotiate from strength, so that go get another job. I had a contract every 3 years. He goes, "Go get another job to the other station, and then you'll have bargaining power." And that was the best advice he gave me. My grandfather helped me with that. And they just continued for 10, 12 years, always calling and saying, "How much you make, Bob? Bob, how much money you making?" And he was so caring about what my future was going to look like that I never had anybody really talk about it. We didn't talk about money in our family, and that was something that was you can't even explain it, because now I wish he was here to see. Doug, thank you, it worked. I appreciate all that advice you gave me. And Mary Jane took the stitches out of the back of my neck and shoved gauze up my nose when I put a pipe through the saw and it came back and hit me and broke my nose. I was all alone at the barn and I put a rag over it and I'm driving down Heath Road and there she was talking to Carmen, and she comes over and, oh dear, come back to the house, back onto the porch, not in the house because you don't want to get blood all in the house. And she stuck the gauze up in there and she says to me, whatever you think, the swelling will go down. And I was like, I didn't see myself, so I'm like, I don't know. And she goes, look at me, the swelling will go down. And I'm like, okay. So I went home and, oh my God, the swelling went down. But she took care of me. And also, Mary Jane, we were all at the Tigerts having a meal. And this was before the meal. She called me out onto the back porch, the deck, to husk corn. And I was like, I don't need to husk corn. I thought I'm in trouble because she wanted me out there and she had the corn and we're husking it and she had a piece of corn in her hand. And I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but she said like that, Bob, don't date my daughter. And I was like, I opened my mouth to talk and she said, hear me out. And she told me why, what whole thing. And it was from such a place of love that she told me that. And to this day, I totally respect that. And we grew up with the Tigert daughters in the summers, and Susan bailed us out. Our motor blew at Monhegan, and we had to be towed in by the Coast Guard and towed into New Harbor. We didn't have a trailer or even a ride home. She was working at Gosnell Arms, like, here, take my car. It's got a tow hitch. Ron's lucky man, tow hitch. You got a tow hitch for that. And just the point-blank honesty that the Tigert family had for me was very refreshing. How much do you make? Don't do this, do that. And they were very, just so strong people that it made such an impression on my life as I grew up and I remember back. And even our latest conversation, Doug was still asking, how much do you make? And the last thing I'll leave you with is, because everybody has a tennis story, we used to play tennis and he came, it was a particularly humid day and he was sweating. He had a headband on, shirt was drenched, the towel, water coming off the glasses, water off the back of the neck, and he was coming up and there's like almost a puddle coming behind him. And like, Doug, is this healthy? Are you okay? And he's like, a little hot, but I beat you, didn't I? And that's so Doug Tigert. So thank you.
Anyone else? I'm sure there are probably some stories that are on people's minds and they don't think this might be an appropriate place to share. I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Doug, but he did live his life to the fullest. There is a gathering following the service downstairs, and I encourage you to tell those stories and continue the celebration of life. And at this time, I think we have some music. Let us be in the spirit of prayer. Gracious God, giver of life and conqueror of death, our strength and our Redeemer, we turn to you in sorrow for our loss, and yet with thanksgiving as we celebrate having shared in Doug's life. With faith in your perfect mercy and wisdom, we entrust him to your keeping. We praise you for your loving kindness to him throughout the days of his earthly life, and for all that he was by nature and grace to all who knew and loved him. We are especially mindful of the lives he touched in the loving relationships of family and all the lives he touched with his teaching and consultation. We remember his service to the community through his participation in local Rotary groups, and for the difference he has made in the lives of children and others in countries far away. We remember his persistence in these efforts, even into his retirement. We thank you that for Doug all sickness and sorrow have ended, and that he has entered into the rest that remains for your people. God of all comfort, look in tender love and compassion on all who are touched by his passing. Be to us all refuge and strength in times of trouble. And may we all know the love of Christ, which passes human understanding, who by death has conquered death, and by rising again has opened the gates of life everlasting. We offer this prayer in the love of Christ, and pray together as he taught us by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil one. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 493 in the blue hymnal. It is a hymn of promise. In the bulb there is a flower. Stand. In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, in cocoons a hidden promise, butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of winter, there's a spring that waits to be unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. There's a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There's a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. From the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery, unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. In our end is our beginning, in our time infinity, in our doubt there is believing, in our life eternity, in our death a resurrection, at the last And now may the love of God and the peace of God, which surpass all human understanding, be with you and abide with you, both now and forever. Amen.